Right. So I'm just welcoming all of our authors after a little while.
Yes,
Our
just joined.
book, our book got published on December 14th. As you know, the one, in a way, one might say embarrassing thing about it is that it's its price. The the publishers don't consult with the editors when they set the price for these things. It's all marketing, as many of you would know. But after having received a few complaints, I got in touch to find out what was going on. And they indicated that that's what the market can bear, because the market is typically university libraries. But then in discussing it with some colleagues, one finds out that many university libraries cannot afford that price for a single book either. So that's how it is for right now. And we'll see with a few months whether things will change. Well, let me welcome Joseph as well. Joseph Cole is joining us from Spain, I believe. Joseph, are you in Spain?
Yes, Naresh. Thank you for the invitation and greetings to all of you.
Yes, indeed. So everyone is with us now. So let me just say what a great experience it has been working with all of you to get this book out with all your chapters. I see this event, as a book conversation, but the ideas, the journey that I hope we are starting, and many of you have started this journey already in different ways, also with different books. Thomas Legrand, for example, has his book on the politics of being. And Joseph, you have your book on Taoist and Buddhist systems for sustainable development. Others are doing extremely important work. So the idea is, how do we help to catalyze and to get this movement towards radically new thinking about sustainable development? It is clear, I'm sure, to all of us gathered here this evening, that while we are making some progress towards the SDGs, some of us, I don't know, I can't speak for any of you, but for me, it has become clear that we will not achieve the SDGs by 2030. That's not at all any doomsday thing. It is doing the struggle to get there is doing extremely important work. And we are getting a lot of innovations. We are getting lots of achievements. But for me, it doesn't seem we will get there in terms of the goals and all the targets. But we will be learning lots of lessons. It is going to force us to reconsider who we are as humans and what is it we really want this planet to look like, and what is it we want to leave behind for future generations, not to speak of current generations. So lots of work to be done, lots of lessons, I think, to be learned. And in my little way, in my little contribution to all of this, I would like to see human beings reflect more deeply on their own true nature and change their own lifestyles on one hand, but on the other hand, more importantly for me, is how do we influence public policy? And how do we get public policy to catalyze this change that we are talking about? Yes, individual realization and individual contribution, really important, but I think the contribution is really small. And without public policy really reflecting these ideals we reflect in the book, and that you all reflect in the chapters you have written, but also in other places and in your other work, is so critical. So that's what is on my mind. I will probably say a few words about my chapter before we start with David, who is in the latest time zone in Australia. But before that, I wanted to welcome our dean, the dean of the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy, Professor R. Sudarshan, and ask Dean Sudarshan to say a few words.
Well,
Dean,
thank you. Thank you very much, Naresh. It's one of the nice things about being dean is that you have wonderful colleagues who very quietly beaver away and produce an extraordinary book without oneself having been, drawn into the nitty-gritty of all that. So I'm grateful to Naresh for being such a fantastic colleague, and to Divya, whose enthusiasm was unbounded for this enterprise. She came to our university just for this, and Sudeep, of course, who's constantly badgered by Naresh as to how are your ideas going to make a difference in the real world. Now, I think sometimes I feel sympathetic to Sudeep because, there are two kinds of knowledge in a way. Those knowledge that is very instrumental, and then you go off and find applications for it. And there's knowledge that you don't know what its applications would be when they would materialize, but that's equally important. That kind of fundamental inquiry of the kind that Sudeep likes. But there's this nice tension between, knowledge as having an instrumental value and knowledge with intrinsic value. So we have that tension. I've been particularly interested in this. I'm a sort of a bystander, but my interest in the spirituality and development goes back a long way. In 1977, I got a research fellowship, a junior research fellowship at Cambridge and St. John's College. And at that time, we set up for the first time in Cambridge something which we called the Yajnavalkya Parishad. Yajnavalkya was a great Indian philosopher, and you have all these discussions about, epistemology, which is pramana. How do you get to know things? Prameya is the object that you study or you learn about. And of course, you have the Brahman described as aprameya, which means boundless, infinite, not in need of any proof. So Yajnavalkya was an important philosopher, and he had great arguments. There's another woman philosopher of the time called Gargi. And so we started this because we wanted to find some connection to what we were doing. I mean, I was at that time working on constitutional law and judicial review of economic legislation. My other friends were working on different things, but we all came together to try and get a handle on this. But then it was, we left Cambridge, and it stopped there. And then in the Ford Foundation, I was greatly inspired by a woman called Kamala Chowdhury, who kept underlining that, spirituality is a missing dimension. I mean, there's a famous saying, of course, in the gospel that man does not live by bread alone, but this dimension is not taken seriously, and all of the development literature is about how to put bread on the table and creature comforts and so on, and missing out an entire dimension of what makes human life worth living, what can make societies flourish. If there was this sort of a common understanding that there's something beyond all these mad pursuit of consumerism and economic growth. And to get at that, I mean, it's a kind of a problem because each individual can say, oh, I'm going to, do my own thing to find my inner peace and so on. But it's not good enough. I mean, you want it to be something that benefits communities, cities, villages, societies, and how to make that happen is the challenge. So I'm hopeful with the great work that the Center for Complexity Economics, Applied Spirituality, and Public Policy that Naresh started I hope it. See, one of the things to do, it seems to me, we are on the way to, in the world of knowledge. You have, see, for instance, there's the Cambridge School of Economics. That's referring to Cambridge, England, and then there's a rival Cambridge in Harvard, and then there's the Chicago School, and so on. In economics, you have the the Frankfurt School, thinking about relevance of Marx and his views on the world today. At that time, Habermas and people like that. So I think we are, unless you create that kind of a collective of intellectuals of high caliber like all of you, and keep pushing the envelope, writing stimulating pieces, so that there is a distinct identity that emerges for the enterprise. I mean, complexity economics is associated with Santa Fe. In the same way, this enterprise ought to be, I hope, associated with the School of Government and Public Policy, even though Divya has abandoned us. That would be good. And this is an initial step towards that kind of thing. Then you have an impact. Then all around the world, where people will write about it and take it seriously, and we'll get more and more understanding, and influence more and more people to this way of thinking. So that's my. So in a way, this event and the book launch is to me a culmination of something that I've personally harbored for a very long time, since, as I said, 77, and I would expect more of it, and we'll have more discussions on this book apart from this conversation with all of you. We'll plan other conversations and try and advance the cause. I mean, there should be something of a crusade. I mean, crusades were bad, but the spirit of getting there, awake, arise, stop not till the goal is reached, kind of energy is needed. So with those words, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sudarshan, for those wonderful, warm thoughts. And indeed, for comparing us, that one day we might be like those big sources of influence around the world. Why not? We need to aim there. We need to aim there. I have, in fact, in my own readings, when we see how people like Hayek in their think tank back in the day, how they developed policy influence, we learn quite a bit. Having good academic work is one thing. Having public policy influence is quite another. And so, yes, we have to aim. I have a chapter, as we all know, on leadership that I think is required for this shift. I wouldn't spend too much time, just to say that in that chapter, I look at what kind of leadership would be required for the transition that we are talking about. I drew from Advaita Vedanta, Sufism, or if you like, the mystical core of Christianity. I drew from and reflected in servant leadership, and a whole range of authentic leadership and so on, principles and ideas, and integrated those in my chapter on leadership for this change we are talking about. I will leave it at that for now, because some people will have who are getting late. And let me turn to our chapter authors, and let me start with our dear friend from the late part of the planet. David, let's start with you and hear your remarks in about 7 minutes. Please share what your thoughts, a few highlights maybe of your chapter, and how you see the unfolding going forward. Over to you, David.
Okay, well, let me just say, first of all, thanks, Naresh and Divya, for organising this. And I also have to give a special thanks to Sudik, because, much of the work that sits behind my chapter is really a product of an ongoing collaboration that Sudip and I have been pursuing for the last, I don't know, five or 6 years, I would say now. So the bulk of my work is really in trying to understand what wisdom is, how wisdom is developed, and then along with Sudip, we've been looking at the possibility of applying the mathematical formalism of quantum physics in the social science context, and some very important reasons drive us both, I guess, to look at quantum analysis in a sense, social analysis through the formalism of quantum physics, because the kind of ontology that quantum physicists have to deal with is quite outside the scope that classical scientific method is designed to deal with. And so they've had to come up with new ways of doing quantitative analysis that are outside the deterministic framework of classical science. And it turns out that the kind of ontological assumptions about the nature of reality that quantum physicists have to deal with is very similar to social ontology. So it's a relational ontology. And in particular, it's it overlaps very strongly with the nature of wisdom, which at its most fundamental level is not defined sort of by necessarily by an a priori theory, but it's really defined by the situation in which you need to act wisely. So it's very sensitive to the context in which you are in, and so it's an enormously difficult social scientific construct to work with, because it is indeterminate, and the whole of quantitative social science is based on very deterministic classical models where you have a construct that is what it is and it's nothing else, whereas wisdom is like a chameleon, I guess. Now, and a really important part of wisdom, and so my foundations in wisdom are practical wisdom from the Aristotelian tradition, but also I guess the middle way kind of practical wisdom of Buddhism. And underlying that is a very deeply worked out ethical theory, which rests in some deep understanding of the most fundamental questions about the nature of humanity, the nature of value, the nature of life itself, and I'm very close to finishing a book about metaphysics or practical metaphysics in practical wisdom, and I guess one of the key arguments in that is that to be wise, first of all, you have to have some metaphysical or spiritual commitments. So you have to have some sort of commitment to how you understand the value of life, how you understand the value of a sustainable planet, and how you even understand what it is we are talking about when we're talking about the good or value. So we can't know for sure always what the answers to very fundamental questions like that are, and we can't always submit them to strict quantitative analysis. But I think it's really important if you're in a leadership position, and I'm sure Naresh will be resonating to this right now, and part of one element of the book is I've done a case study on the current conflict in Gaza, and you can see, if you do that kind of analysis, that there's a complete vacuum at the level of ethics and at the level of metaphysics and spirituality, despite the fact that you could argue that there's a religious overlay to this whole conflict. And what that tells me is that you have a group of leaders, and I'm going to say this is on both sides of that conflict, who are men, and they're almost exclusively men, of very weak character. They're very, very weak people who parade themselves as strong leaders. And we allow them to get away with that. And we're watching the primaries in the US at the moment, where it looks more and more likely every day that another weak leader who parades himself as a strong leader may assume the leadership of America again. So there's a whole set of questions there around wisdom and spirituality and metaphysics that, for very, very practical reasons, we need to get on top of. Now, another element of all of this is, where the hell has rigorous policy analysis gone in the world today? Where is it? I can't see it anywhere. I don't see any liberal democratic governments with strong commitments to doing objective analysis to underpin policy anymore, because they're afraid of it. Now, I guess the project that Sudip and I are working on, and Naresh has alluded to how fundamental it is. And so it's probably really a 20-year, maybe even 30-year project before we can produce the sort of technology, the analytical technology, that would make it easy for very complex policy analysis to be done. But we believe that it's applying these formal models that have been created by quantum physicists and mathematicians for doing the enormously complex analysis of that begin with the enormous complexity and indeterminacy of context that we think can help. Some of my current research is also about if we can say, well, we can develop these analytical tools for doing quantitative analysis of very, very complex social realities, to make sense of that context. And how do we put that together at a very practical level? And what I'm thinking about at the moment is, once you get those emergent properties coming out of the complex system, and that's the enormous complexity that sits behind reality, then maybe what we can do is use the very precise mathematics of harmony. And in this sense, I'm talking about musical harmony rather than harmony in the philosophical sense, and particularly in the Asian philosophical sense. I'm talking about the very precise mathematical, A on the piano is 440 hertz, precisely. It's not any other frequency. That's what it is. And the really interesting thing about harmony and the derivatives that turn out to become scales and all sorts of different scales is that there's an almost inexhaustible ability of harmony to express human sentiment.
David, can you wrap up in a minute or so?
Yeah. And so I guess one of the things that I'm looking for, and this is really my final comment, is how do we create a project where we bring together the people who can work with the quantum formalism, the people who can do the kind of philosophy that we need to understand metaphysics, spirituality, and wisdom, the kinds of musicians who understand the deep subtleties of harmony, and the software engineers who can actually develop the analytical tools that we could use that would make it much easier to bring very sophisticated social analysis back into the policy development process. So I think I should stop there, Naresh.
Yeah, David, thank you very much. I should have mentioned, David, at the outset, a little bit of your affiliation. David Rooney is Professor of Management and Organizational Studies at Makerere University in Australia. So we'll have our conversation, our discussion after we have heard the panelists, if you agree, so we can hear from them all. So let's turn to Joseph Cole. Joseph is a Professor of Strategy, Sustainability, and Innovation at IADA Business School. Joseph, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor. And thank you also to you and Divya for inviting me. I mean, you know that I'm a fan of what you're doing here at Jindal, and I think it's a very much required initiative having centers like this that might bridge, such a very complex but fascinating topic as spirituality to apply it in policy design. So, and also I'm very flattered to be part of this cohort of outstanding researchers joining today. So there's some noise I can't. Oh, thank you.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much. So the chapter, the humble contribution to the book stems from some research I started 20 years when I was living and working in East Asia. As I got very much interested, it was an action research, mainly inspired project. And that's the synthesis of the book that you mentioned, which is called also Buddhist and Taoist Systems Thinking. I think that most of the problems that we have stem from the context in which we live, that is somehow also coined the Anthropocene, this new geological era where the changes we see on the earth are mainly provoked by human action through an a quite extractive economic system, sometimes called capitalism or industrial capitalism, right? Maybe we could find an underlying cause also in all the chapters and authors that are here that have contributed with the chapter to the book, which is that most of the systemic approaches that are currently trying to address this problem stems from a world view, which is very much coming from a Western view of looking at things that was precisely not systemic, rather linear and reductionist. So a way to address this problem, there are many ways. My proposal, based on my own experience and research, is actually to bridge that consciousness gap, to tap into perennial philosophies or wisdom that stem from universal principles. And I found Taoism and Buddhism being two philosophies that really tap into that. To me, why Eastern wisdom? I became really fascinated by especially Buddhism and Taoism philosophies, because to me, they are the earliest systems thinkers. And when I say that, I'm not just saying that in favor of them and in detrimental to other indigenous philosophies, because they are all systemic. But to me, they were the first that recorded, the first early recordings of systemic theories were actually coming from Taoism. Then later Taoism intersected with Buddhism. And from that intersection, we got what is called in Japanese Zen, but in Chinese Chan and in Korean Son. And that also then that allowed to move to the West, especially to the US and later to Europe in the 50s. But it was especially challenging, something systemic. That's why other indigenous philosophies, they transfer the knowledge orally. So orally allows you to better grasp what systems mean, right? Because it's non-linear. And so it was very challenging, any systemic thinking, transfer it into writing writing is a way to codify knowledge in a very linear way, right? It's word after word. And so this is one of the main complexities we have, systems thinkers that try to write about systemic thinking. We have that complexity, how to convey systems thinking and complex issues and concepts in a linear way. So that's why these conversations really help a lot. So that's I became very fascinated with that. I saw that also why Buddhism and Taoism, that may also be a question. And to me, they became there's a symbiosis and there's an intersection and there's some commonalities. So some fundamental universal principles that are common to those philosophies. And it's fascinating because the methodology that the early researchers on Buddhism and Taoism applied was different, because the Tao is observe nature and men departing from the assumption that humans are nature, but it was an external and internal observation. And the Buddhists did the way around. They assumed they departed from the same assumption, but looking inside. And from that, they discovered universal principles that are also more recently also quite confirmed by modern science. And this is also fascinating, right? So we have scientists like Niels Bohr and David Bohm and Werner Heisenberg that developed the uncertainty principle, the complementarity principle, for example. Even also the Chile school with Varela and Maturana, the principle of autopoiesis, those principles are very similar. They resemble what early Taoists and Buddhists already discovered many years ago. So that's quite fascinating. And this is something that I explore. So for applying spirituality into any design, systemic design, being policy, an intervention, a program, a project, a business, I think working on the mindset through grasping those principles such as interdependence, impermanence, for example, and emptiness, and the Wu Wei, or the natural doing, which are the four common principles I found between Taoism and Buddhism, is quite fascinating because it allows us to connect with the true nature, that we are all the same, and we are not just part of nature, but we are nature. And that brings us in a completely different space. And from that space, then we can create new things, and we can create new ways of being, and reconnecting with all ways of being, which makes it new, and reinterpreting also systemic design and the work we can do. And here I come with the last idea I want to share with you today, and that I also share in that chapter. When we enter into the domain of designing systems, or changing systems, or system transformation, or public policy in a systemic context, we need to simplify that complexity. We need to find ways, because we are in that interrectum, as the philosopher Gramsci said, that where all things, the old ways of doing things are dying, but the new things, are still not yet born, or they are emerging, right? But it's very difficult to put them, some eyes and a mouth and a face so that we can all know what they mean. So in complexity, to me, is a fundamental approach to applying spirituality. And in the chapter, I share some simplex tools or methodologies that I have developed and used in the domain of public policy and systemic design. Some of them, one of them is the yin-yang creative tensions, which stems from acknowledging the dilemmas and the underlying structures of the dilemmas that stem from polarities. So it's a way to manage paradoxes. Life unfolds in paradoxes. And then another one that's very useful also for organizations that are transitioning towards this new paradigm, with more consciousness of being aware of the systemic impact they generate, not only at the economic, but at the social and environmental level. And then also the Zen business model, which is a model based on the Wuxing, the 5 transitioning energies, which is, it allows you to see organizations as complex adaptive systems in a very organic way. And it allows us to have a diagnosis of how organizations do create value at the systemic level, and therefore to apply also and design strategies that are aligned to harmonize the organization with the external and internal environments. And finally, just to conclude, I'd like to say that, well, sometimes as change makers, we also get a lot of frustration, right? Because want to change things for the better. And sometimes we also become tired of that, with the risk of being also detach from that, no? And more than trying to find breaches, no, we become more as participators, no. So the mere fact of being, we don't come to this world, right? We emerge out of it. So I think that's a fundamental, although subtle distinction, because that allows us that not to see bridges, but to see ourselves as the bridge, you know, that we need in order to make that link. And I think the book is a fundamental contribution to actually explore, resignify what the spirituality means in the context of today, of the 21st century, with the challenges we have now, and also how we can apply it to the structures we have built, our ancestors also built, and that we perpetuate in order to make this a better place to live. So thank you for that, and over to you.
Professor Singh, you are on mute.
Me. Somebody's muting me and then I can't unmute. IT, please make sure that I can unmute when I want to. Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Joseph. It's interesting that both of our speakers so far are from business schools. I don't think many people would imagine that both of you are from business schools, and one is coming to wisdom and from quantum physics angle, and the other one is using Taoism and Buddhism systems thinking and bringing in complexity. You know, sometimes I've been asked, how can you have a center that is called the Center for Complexity Economics, Applied Spirituality and Public Policy? And if nothing else, I think the webinar this evening, Indian time, will help to explain that. And both of you who have spoken so already, you know, you weave those ideas so well together because they exist together. One cannot operate without the other one. And I'm sure others will illustrate that as well. So I will turn now to Thomas Legrand. Thomas has just, well, not just anymore, Thomas, it's now quite a while, published the book, Politics of Being. He's an ecological economist. I guess he lives in this exotic place, the south of France. But more importantly, perhaps he was neighbor of Thich Nhat Hanh, who was also his teacher. So over to you, Thomas.
Thank you very much, Naresh, and hello everyone. Very glad to be part of this book, and congratulations for and gratitude for Divya and Naresh to make it happen, and to all of you in this call for contributing. It's a very big endeavor we are in terms of bringing, you know, applied spirituality to sustainable development policy. Maybe if you can allow sharing my screen, I could use a presentation.
I hope you have sharing rights. You should.
No, it didn't work.
Not yet.
Yeah.
IT, can you please, Thomas Legrand, can you give sharing privileges to Thomas?
IT, please give sharing rights to Thomas
So I did
Legrand.
my contribution to, yeah.
Maybe I can try.
Hello?
I can also try to give you.
Yeah, otherwise I don't, it's not a problem. I will do it without, no worries. You can let me know when it's on and I can move on to there. Yeah, so the chapter I contributed is on this concept I have developed through my book called Politics of Being, and the subtitle of the book is very much aligned with our endeavor today. It's Wisdom and Science for a New Development Paradigm. So I'm a sustainability practitioner working in particular on environmental issues. And recently, I've been able to bring that work, you know, on consciousness into the UN systems through this Conscious Food Systems Alliance, which is convened by UNDP. So that shows, you know, it's actually possible nowadays, you know, to bring this agenda into that kind of institutional settings. And with this, the main question I was holding was, what is a wisdom-based approach to development? And I think I found the answer to this question. I mean, I've been reviewing what the interspiritual, interreligious movement had to say on the question, and I found this quote in the Earth Charters, which says, when basic needs have been met, human development is primarily about being more, not having more. And I was surprised to notice that no one really, I would not say bother, but endeavor to define, you know, what this means, being more, and in theory, but also in practice. But first to recognize, you know, that I think, you know, it has been said that our current economic or development model is broken, and we need a new one. And just to say that this new bottom line on being is actually congruent with some sociological realities that we can observe, in particularly in rich countries over the last decades. I refer to the work of Engelhardt, who was coordinating the World Value Survey. And what he found was that he saw a cultural evolution in rich countries from materialism to post-materialism, and more fundamentally from survival to self-expression. And I think that's, you know, we are getting closer into that direction of this fundamental orientation. I think, you know, when we get to the root of the problem is really from moving from having or economic growth to a being. And what does that mean? It means setting being as our main collective goal, and also recognizing that the goal and the means are not separate. So it's something, you know, as philosophers have taught, Aristotle or Buddha, you know, the practices or virtue, you know, virtue get developed as we practice them, right? So how can we develop institution that fosters the practice of virtues? And so what I mean by being is really the fulfillment of all beings, not only human beings. So I think it's important to move away from this anthropocentric vision and to recognize that all living beings have the right to be. And so the rights of nature are very much part of this framework. And trying to develop what being means in terms of, you know, expressing our full potential. And simply, it's on one side, you know, or through us being, let's say, becoming who we are. And I think, you know, it's really we see a lot of aspirations in our culture, you know, to become who we are. And also the other dimension is, let's say, our highest being, we could say. So the development of virtues, qualities, human values, etc. And there's a lot of, you know, of course, of history and philosophy for emphasizing that. So, and the idea of the politics of being is really to align all institution with what I believe is our true reason to be here on Earth, becoming who we are, the best and most complete version of ourselves. And you may find, you know, in this definition of being, you know, strong resonance with, for example, the concept of eudaimonia in Greek philosophy. So it's not something really completely new. No, there's a lot of philosophical and wisdom teachings that points to the relevance of this bottom line for societies. And, you know, getting often when we talk about this kind of cultural evolution, such bottom line could foster, we tend to see it from the happening at the individual level, people going through their own traditions and thinking that at some point this should, you know, prompt some evolution of our institutions. My perspective is more on what are actually the institutions that embody this, we could say, you know, higher consciousness, more developed culture, and especially how they can also foster, because, you know, we as individuals are also made of our we are influenced by the institutions of our society. So how can we design in a way that not only that bring out the best in humans, to use the word of Elinor Ostrom, the first woman Nobel Prize in economics, who recognize that actually, all institutions are doing exactly the contrary by emphasizing our selfish, competitive nature through the Homo economicus assumption. So it's important to recognize that at the moment we're doing exactly the contrary, and that is maybe a good reason to understand, the crisis we're in, which is also an ethical crisis. And so, what is a method to build that agenda? I say that, and a lot of spiritual teachings have been emphasizing this, that spiritual values should be the foundations of our society. They should be the foundation of the politics of being, as I conceive it. And as I was trying to map out, where is this new paradigm emerging through many different names, I realized all these names were indeed, we could call them spiritual values. And these spiritual values are now the subject of science over the last decades. There are scientific field of research that have developed around them, and they are increasingly at the core of social and political change initiatives. So we have talked about systemic and complex thinking, right? That's already been mentioned. The idea that the paradigm of, we could say, living systems or life, and in all traditional wisdom, it has been said we should organize ourselves with how nature works, and there is more and more the regeneration movement exactly says the same, and that's relevant for organization of societies in many different domains to imitate the patterns of life. Happiness, gross national happiness, well-being, economy, alliance, for example, love, compassion, empathy, initiatives such as the Charter for Compassion, peace studies, culture of peace, mindfulness. There has been some work in the UK to show the potential of mindfulness in education, justice, business, and health as a tool for public policy. And of course, there's a lot of history to that. We can get back even to the Platonic transcendental of truth, goodness, beauty. And based on that, basically, we can identify concrete policy options in many different sectors and based almost exclusively on existing examples. So actually, when we bring back, this kind of spiritual, almost, I would say, bottom line to very concrete, what do human needs for thriving? We get back to more, psychological considerations, the importance of secured attachment, and some, family or parenting policy can support that. So yes, a very concrete agenda: education for being, integrative health, nature's rights, restorative justice, what I call intelligent governance, building on the work of the Ben Gurion Institute and showing the parallels with Baha'i teachings. And by the way, the prophet of the Baha'i said his own governance system was to serve as a blueprint for humanity. And, we see now political scientists that are actually getting to the same conclusions. So going to the conclusion, just to say, in the book, there are a lot of concrete policy examples. We can have policy agendas in many sectors, very concrete on that. In conclusion, the importance of healing trauma, because, human beings, I think, tend naturally to do good and to thrive by doing good. So what really hinders that aspect of us to show us are really related a lot to trauma. We need to work on that at the individual and collective level to show, how wisdom and science can work together and the role of each one, building a strong rationale, providing a simple but integrative conceptual framework where, all different perspectives can fit. And as I said, offer policy recommendations to show concrete, to show that it's not an etherical agenda, but it can be very actionable. and yeah, as some contributing to, I think there's a whole field of research and action that we are developing together. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Thomas, and thanks for highlighting this agenda that this book is all about, which is about institutional and public policy shifts that we need to derive from wisdom and deeper spiritual understanding. So let's move to Vern Reddycup. My dear friend Vern is Professor Emeritus at St. Paul University in Ottawa, Canada. He and I have worked for quite a few years on a range of things, including complexity, spirituality, and I might dare say conflict and public policy. So Vern, over to you for your 7 minutes.
Thank you, Naresh. It's an honor, and I would say especially a delight to be part of this. I feel a deep resonance with all of my colleagues who have presented so far, and it seems like we could talk through the night about areas in which we share a passion. I'm going to share my screen now, and so the key thing that I want to say in a nutshell is that if we are going to move ahead on meeting the sustainable development goals or having a real impact on what's going on in the world, we have to attend to the non-material dimension. That this is a key need, and we're not going to make the progress that we need to without attending to this. This resonates, of course, with what my colleagues have been saying, and I'll come at it from a slightly different perspective, a different way of framing. But all of these ideas come together in, as has been pointed out, in a non-linear way. They're part of the whole, and as we come at it from our own different perspectives, there's always a value added, and so I think the ongoingness and the vision of there being a school in the sense of a school of thought that emerges and grows is a really, really neat vision. So this is a wonderful first step. So if we're going to talk about where does the non-material fit in, I think we can use the work of Ken Wilber and many other integral theorists, including our own Richard McGuigan here in Canada, and use these axes of the interior and the external, and show how they all move together. So the material, imperial, observable parts receive lots of attention all the time. We get all the statistics about global warming and different aspects of the problems of the Anthropocene, but we don't pay as much attention to the internal part. And I'm not for a moment saying that all of the things on the external side are not important. These are extremely important. All I'm saying is let's complement it by these things that are on the internal, and this is one way of mapping them, if you like. So I'm going to talk about these different themes that you see there, and of course there's the individual part, and in my chapter I also deal with the collective part, and we'll be saying a little bit about some of these, and I'll move through them relatively quickly just to give an overview of what we're talking about. Catherine Peel Kaufman, who has done a lot of work on emotions, has talked about how they emerged from the very beginning, from single-celled organisms, always asking the question, in effect, what is bad for me, what is good for me? So our emotions point to those things that we should be avoiding, that are difficult, that seem not to be right. And they also point to what makes us thrive and what makes us grow. And from her perspective, and she argues fairly conclusively that our cognitive function is driven by the emotional part. This goes along with moral psychologists who say that we make judgments very quickly, and then we use our cognitive capacity to try to rationalize those, explain them, and argue for them. And so we need to attend to this and see how we can harness this capacity of ours for moving ahead. In my own work, I've linked emotions, and in this case, we have the emotions around what is bad for me, linked with meaning, connectedness, security, recognition, and action. And the other side of this, of course, is joy and self-confidence and self-recognizance and self-actualization and so on. A key part of our inner life has to do with how we are oriented. So in our the idea was made that we're looking at the relationality of everything, who we are in relation to others, and who we are in relation to others and in our different relational systems is marked by what I call mimetic structures. And I've been influenced by the work of René Girard and his mimetic theory, but I've come to see mimetic structures are patterns that go on through time, and a particular relational system can be marked by either a mimetic structure of violence in which we are trying to get ahead at the expense of others or harm others, put them down, exclude them, or mimetic structures of blessing in which there's a mutuality of helping one another achieve our various goals. And of course, all of the moral principles that others are talking about. Thomas refers to a number of them in his chapter, values around love and care and so on, contribute then to mimetic structures of blessing. I've also been influenced by Michael Polanyi, who's in this line of physicists who have been making the connection to philosophical themes. So his personal knowledge that came out and it was published in the 1960s really develops this idea that most of what we know we can't put into words, and it forms the tacit domain, and out of that tacit domain emerges those things that we can talk about and we can make explicit, and as our explicit domain grows, that then becomes part of a tacit domain at another level. And if we pay attention then to the life experience of different leaders, if you like, their life experience has informed their tacit domain. So we can ask, how is it that they came to be the weak leaders that were talked about while trying to present themselves as being strong? And there has to be an attentiveness to these experiences. And we also think about those children in Gaza right now and what's happening to their own tacit domain as they live the horrors that they're experiencing right now. If we think about the collective and the tacit domain of the collective, things that are not put into words but function and play a powerful role in shaping who we are, we can think of memes as, in the dictionary, it says elements of a culture or system of behavior passed from one individual to another by imitation, or we could say mimetically in Girard's knowledge, or other genetic means. So these memes are deeply held senses of what's really important. And so if we link the idea of memes with Catherine Peel's questions about what is good for me and what is bad for me, we can say, what is bad for me and for humanity, and what is good for humanity? And so when we think of it in that deep emotional way, we can say what has been projected for the last at least 4,000 years is the idea of empire, the meme of grandiose leaders, and the meme of self-interest. And the meme of self-interest has been baptized, if you like, has been embraced, and we've had a shift from this is what is to this is what should be. And so a certain reading of Darwin, for instance, has said, you know, it's all about survival of the fittest. And we know now that it's survival of the people and species that can work together. But it's been morphed into this idea of self-interest is most important in international relations and in economics. And that's driving a lot of what is happening. If we think about what...
Can I ask you to wrap up in a minute or two?
Okay.
Thanks.
So I will move ahead very quickly. So this then leads to the need for public-spirited leadership, and taking into account complexity and the importance of fostering the emergence of public-spirited leadership. The nature of spirit, we learn from exemplars, and if we attend to spirit, then it produces certain fruit, and we can tell by the fruit what lies behind it. There's a sense of spiritual realism. Jamie Price has a book, The Call, in which he really develops this beautifully, where we have a spiritual awareness and a tug of the spirit. And in consciousness, we've already heard about this, but we're moving toward growth and complexity. And the practical thing that I put forward at the end, if we want to move toward policy, I've had a lot of experience with both penitentiary chaplains and military chaplains, both of whom have access to the people who are the commanding officers or the warden of a penitentiary, and their concern goes right through to the prisoners and the privates, and they have access to the whole system, and they have a mandate to look out for issues of spirituality. And we need to have something like chaplains in every developmental project who have that kind of a mandate, as well as developmental evaluators, a concept that Naresh has developed. But in a complex system, developmental evaluators are embedded within the system and are looking for new developments, whatever new is emerging, so that these new things that could not have been predicted can be built upon. So that's my pitch at the end. So I will...
Thank you so much. Thank you, Warren. Thanks. That was quite a bit covered in a short space of time. Thank you so much. And now I turn to another dear friend, Rob Work. Rob has been writing quite a bit since he retired from the UNDP, where he was principal advisor. He was also at the New York University Wagner School of Public Service as a professor, and he, among his many books, the one that comes to mind on this occasion is The Compassionate Civilization. Rob, welcome, and please share your thoughts with us. You will need to unmute.
Thank you, Naresh.
Thanks.
I would invite each of you to become aware of your breath, your breathing in and breathing out. Breathing in compassion for this earthling, breathing out compassion for the earth. Indeed, thanks to you, Naresh, and the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy for inviting me to offer a chapter for this important book, and thanks to Divya for your affirmation of my ideas and words. And warm greetings to Sudarshan, he may have gone, another UNDP colleague. So I am very grateful for my 55 years of serving people and planet. Thank you. So in my sharing with you, I'll share a few words from the chapter on compassionate policies to relieve systemic suffering, which concludes this provocative book. Many people, including myself, believe that we are living in the most critical time in human history, a time to do what is needful or face the direst of consequences. Never in the past 5,000 years has humanity faced such colossal dangers and such exhilarating possibilities. The very future of life on Earth is at stake. We face multiple interlocking crises, as you've heard, any one of which could be decisive: climate chaos, misogyny, systemic poverty, fascism, intolerance, and a culture of violence. A whole system transformation is underway, and we are at the brink of either mass extinction or a whole new way of being human on planet Earth. Which it will be depends on what you and I do with our lives. All conscious beings experience suffering: physical, mental, emotional, relational, societal, and ecological, through gaps, distress, and pain. Compassion is to be with suffering. Calm is with, passion is suffering. Compassion, to be with suffering. Compassion goes beyond empathy by taking actions that help relieve suffering in others, in one's own body, mind, and society, and the living earth. It is often cited that, according to anthropologist Margaret Mead, the first sign of civilization was a healed femur bone 15,000 years ago. It was evidence that other humans had cared for a wounded person until his or her leg bone healed. In any case, I would submit that civilization, as my colleagues have said, is the embodiment of civility, care, and compassion in social, economic, political, cultural, and ecological dimensions. For me, combining compassion and civilization into compassionate civilization provides an inspiring vision of a macro-historical societal system infused with a powerful ethical stance based in human nature itself. My hope is that this concept may empower those of us working to create a better world, a world that works for everyone and protects the environment, and one that is both pro-people and pro-planet. To realize a compassionate civilization, we need to create a compelling vision, identify major obstacles, invent effective strategies and policies, and take practical actions, utilizing a strategic planning process such as the technology of participation talk developed by the Institute of Cultural Affairs. Imagination is very powerful. Architects imagine their buildings before putting pen to paper. Drafters of constitutions imagine how their nations will function effectively. Athletes imagine achieving perfect form before competing. Visualizing, dreaming, and envisioning are practical tools for inventing the new. Each one of us imagines what we hope the future will bring and be. Historian Rutger Bregman wrote, "If basic income sounds utopian to you, then I'd like to remind you that every milestone of civilization, from the end of slavery to democracy to equal rights for men and women, was once a utopian fantasy too." Got it? Albert Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge. And he meant it in a subtle way, which we can't go into. Jean Houston challenges us with, we are attracted and motivated by the lure of becoming. A compelling vision can be created within each of the four dimensions that integral thinker Ken Wilber, as you've just seen, identifies as individual beliefs and behaviors and collective cultures and systems. In a compassionate civilization, empathy, altruism, and kindness will be preeminent values and expressions. Whole societies will greatly admire these qualities and the individuals and groups that manifest them. Greed will be seen as a base desire. Selfishness and harming others will be understood as tragic character flaws. Humility, sharing, cooperation, and collaboration will be celebrated as highly evolved traits. Entire societies of a compassionate civilization will exalt the common good and will ensure that both the natural and the built commons are sustained and sustainable while celebrating the unique contributions of individuals, communities, organizations, cultures, and bioregions. Societies will continually refine themselves to ensure that optimal conditions are in place for developing and sharing the full potential of each living being. In a compassionate civilization, humanity has awakened from the trance of ever-increasing consumption and production and has evolved to never-ending learning and caring. Obstacles that can block this vision include mistaken individual mindsets, harmful individual behaviors, misguided collective cultures, and harmful collective policies, of course. The deepest blocks arise, however, from ignorance of the nature of the self. There is no permanent separate self, only impermanence. change, and interbeing. If someone believes that they are a permanent, independent self, then fear, greed, anger, hatred, and violence can arise to protect and promote this illusory self and block the realization of a compassionate civilization. A compassionate civilization embodies strategies and policies of compassion, of environmental sustainability, gender equality, socioeconomic justice, participatory governance, cultural tolerance, and peace and nonviolence. And my colleagues, other authors have mentioned these powerfully. Thank you. To accomplish these, we need to transform individual mindsets and values, change individual behaviors, catalyze cultural evolution, and redesign whole systems and public policies. A few individual and collective actions and programs that are needed include: stop extracting, processing, selling, and burning fossil fuels that are harming life on Earth. Stop passing laws that take away a woman's sovereignty over her own body. Stop allowing our fellow human beings to live in poverty or without education or health care. Stop passing laws that make it difficult or impossible for people to vote. Stop people of one religious tradition, racial group, or sexual orientation from controlling and harming people of other practices. Stop allowing the manufacturing and selling of arms. May our book help catalyze a compassionate civilization. Breathing in courage as this earthling, breathing out courage for the earth.
Thank you so much, Rob. Always inspiring. Thanks very much. I see you have all kinds of thumbs up from all over the world, so that's great. All right. So we want to have a bit of a discussion before Divya shares her thoughts and wrap it up, which we will do by 9 p.m. IST. So I have seen a number of comments coming from Kevin. Kevin, I wondered whether you wanted to unmute and share any of those comments. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. A wonderful call. Thanks for finding my way here. Thanks to Robertson for that. I appreciate it. My interest is primarily in transitional governance and how to look towards pre-colonial democratic process. And this was sparked by recently a discussion that was happening in the United Kingdom, whereby a couple of years ago, a woman ran for the mayorship of London, and her primary campaign policy was a citizens' assembly platform for people to be able to make decisions. So it was really interesting for me at that time because the people that were on that Zoom call were all from the United Kingdom. And when I was sharing my thoughts about how great it was to consider pre-colonial Greek era citizens' assemblies as a transitional governance model, because in Canada, there was an existing democracy here prior to the colonials coming to this continent. And it was called the Confederacy, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, which was a functioning democracy before contact. And the US Constitution was actually borrowed / stolen from the Confederacy and adapted to what the Constitution is today. So when bringing the idea of let's look at other examples of pre-colonial philosophy and see if we can put them into a pot so that we can, and it's very difficult to do that because everyone's so compassionate about their own beliefs that to ask people to look at those beliefs to see if we can take the cream off of the top of all of these ideas and create a new philosophy that's built upon these historical ideas of community leadership. And I'll quickly wrap it up by suggesting that what I've seen and what I found within neighborocracy or children's parliaments of India is a very, very unique idea, because we can take the pre-colonial concept of democracy and connect it with new governance models such as children's parliaments that brings youth into this new idea, this transitional governance model, because science is telling us that we need to bring youth into the equation, as well as science is telling us that we need to bring indigenous philosophy of climate into the mitigative strategies for a collective option around the world to see if we can get through where we are at this moment. So very briefly, it's 4 pillars. It's pre-colonial philosophy of democratic process. It's youth within the governance model. Number 3 is a global watershed council of grandmothers, perhaps at the United Nations level, so that we all have a commonality in this watershed idea. So therefore, let's bring that commonality into the world focus. And the last component of this 4-pillared strategy is the technology that we have available for us to be able to make large-scale decision-making processes. Perhaps an ideological aggregator that takes everyone's ideas entered at every level of governance, and the best ideas percolate to the top, therefore making our politicians less political and more project managers, because the ideas of the community at the time of election have percolated to the top. Therefore, those politicians are project managers and can be equally, sorry, I'm lost my track, but the project managers, because the flexibility within our governance models needs to be way more agile in the future than it has been today and in our past. So thank you very much for allowing me to spit that out.
Thanks,
It's been
Kevin.
years for.
Thank you so much. Sudeep, let's make it brief so we can get a few.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just make it brief, and thank you very much for organizing this. This is really, it was so kind of enriching. And I will just like to compliment few points which David and Thomas and Joseph started with, because they all pointed out to the interface between science and wisdom traditions. And that is exactly my own chapter with Divya, which perhaps we will discuss later on. Now, I will say that these are exciting times, because though this particular thinking of interface between wisdom traditions and science that happened in 1920s itself, Niels Bohr and various other luminaries, even Albert Einstein, but from a different perspective, we know. But then I find that currently there have a very interesting kind of awakening happening. For example, in our own chapter with Divya, we have referred to something like relational quantum mechanics. Now, relational quantum mechanics is one particular perspective which has been promoted by Carlo Rovelli and others, which really draws a lot from Madhyamaka Buddhism. And in Madhyamaka Buddhism, we have this relational ontology picture, and that is becoming vital for understanding science itself. And this, to our mind, is something very interesting, because, you know, until and unless science also emerges and moves away from its realist, objective, positivist thinking into more spiritual and more, in the genuine sense, spiritual in the genuine sense, we are not going to solve these problems of the world. So that is one very interesting point which we are also kind of looking forward to. The second point, which David mentioned very briefly and also quite densely, that is quantum-like framework. That is the area in which I work and also with David and others. Now, this is a particular framework which is both mathematical but also draws upon different philosophies. And it draws upon Buddhism and also various other Eastern wisdom traditions. There are some people who have been working there who are coming from different areas, like Karen O'Brien. Just a few days back, I had a conversation with her. So Karen O'Brien is very noted climate scientist, and she is bringing in this kind of frameworks to understanding that how relational agency, relational agencyalism can be understood in the terms of systemic crisis like climate. So that is one interesting direction in which modern science can really lead us in conjunction with Eastern wisdom traditions. And finally, I would just like to say that very recently I've been working with Professor Partha Ghosh, who is a very eminent scientist in our country, where we are developing a concrete kind of like a logical framework which is capable enough to describe contextuality and other things which David also mentioned, unmanifest, for example, unmanifest to becoming. So I think that Eastern wisdom traditions can also offer a lot of concrete frameworks which they can be used to, concrete problems like policy problems and so on. So these are the few recollections.
Thank you. Sudeep, and I'm sure all our participants would be anxious to see the mathematics of the unmanifest. That's what Sudeep is going to produce very soon. So good stuff coming. Let's see whether there are any other hands before I will turn it over very soon to Divya. Anybody else would like to raise your hands? I didn't see any questions in the chat. Kirti, please go ahead. Kirti is one of our PhD students. Kirti, go ahead.
Good evening, good morning, everybody, wherever you are. Thank you very much for this very enlightening discussion. I'll just, you might say I'm being playful, but this thought occurred and I thought I'll pose it to everybody here. History also teaches us that rulers at various points in time, especially in Europe, let's say the Church of England or the Church in France, was pretty well connected to the governance at that point in time, either the king or a queen or whoever was in power. And there's also good indication in Indian history also that emperors would seek advice from philosophical/spiritual advisors were always there with them to help in governance matters. So I'm just wondering, while we are talking about the confluence of spirituality and public policy to good extent here, and by extension governance, what lessons can we draw from the good and bad things that have happened in history of humanity that can be useful in the discussion and for the future of humanity and the benefit of all of us going forward?
Good point. Good question, Kirti. And more research required. Pankaj, briefly, we are almost out of time, but of course you are here with us. Our dear colleague, please go ahead, Pankaj.
Hello, Naresh ji and all the very distinguished people on the panel. I just want to compliment each one of you and under leadership of Naresh ji, who are doing a great job. So my compliments there. And I believe that as we are further maturing, the role of Vidya and Avidya, that is, we talk about liberation, and the role of being has to be given more and more prominence. And the role of meditation, mindfulness, wellness, we need to really find a way how we can have a very good, healthy mix there. So that would be my very brief comment over there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Pankaj, and thanks for making it very brief. Vidya, we should probably have one closing line from the, or maybe you should do that. Why don't you do your piece and then ask the panelists if they can do 10-second closing, one line each? I leave that to you, but I want to give you some time to share your thoughts. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Professor Singh. So I hope I'm audible.
Yeah, you are.
Yes. Okay. So the last hour was such an insightful time for me. So we were discussing how we can apply spirituality to public policy development and to imagine, as Rob said, to imagine our future, our civilization, our society. The way I think about spirituality is the constant evaluation, a dynamic evolution of the answer to the question, who we are, who I am. And it's a question that maybe we can ask ourselves more often in these times, which is more polarized and more divided, and play an integrative role. The way I understand about spirituality is the chapter that I worked on with Sudeep was this sense of very deep sense of interconnectedness and feeling that we are all one, because we are. I mean, scientifically, if you see as well, there are plenty evidence that we are connected in some way or the other. And Ubuntu as well, I think Warren mentioned it in his presentation. It's a critical thinking for me. It's a critical value for me. So how we can, for example, Warren discussed about paying more attention than we are paying right now to the non-material dimension of our reality. Rob talked about compassionate civilization. Thomas, who left, I think, so he talked about, he made a very good attempt at defining being, which I think we should think more often. So being versus having, and David was talking about development of the concept of wisdom and the importance of context when we are thinking about situations. Joseph was talking about how Western view might have led us to maybe we can shift more to Eastern views of Buddhism and Taoism while thinking about business and institutions, and closing the consciousness gap through these views. So I hope I covered all the like everybody who's talked tonight, and how we can develop policies through these skills. I call these skills rather than values, because I think we need to put effort, a constant deliberate effort, in developing the virtues, the inner development, spirituality that we're talking about, and how we can apply those to developing policies, institutions, like Thomas said, business, like Joseph said, culture, what Warren mentioned, international relations, and society as a whole, and a compassionate civilization, and therefore move towards a sustainable future. Anything is possible if we think about it, like Rob said. So we need to imagine. That's the importance. So now I'll invite all our panelists, and the first line should have been to thank you for such insightful discussion to all our panelists: David, Joseph, Thomas, Warren, Rob, Naresh, Sudeep, Kevin, and thank you for participation by all our guests tonight. And now I invite all the panelists.
And maybe Divya, we start with the last first and reverse the order. So why don't
I can call out them?
Yeah.
Sure.
Let's get Rob with his one-liner. Rob?
Yes.
You need to yeah.
May all beings, including you and me, realize peace, happiness, wisdom, and compassion.
Thank you very much, Rob. Warren?
The clan mothers used to appoint the chiefs, and they could remove the chiefs. Let's learn to build institutions where people of wisdom have an impact on who emerges as leaders.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Warren. David?
Oh, I think my parting comment is to say that we need to clearly recognize that we, as humans, are fundamentally a spiritual beast, and through that we create a community of past, present, and future humans, and we should be working harder to capitalize on this wonderful basic human quality that we have and turn this world around.
My closing remark would be on greed. I used to think that humans are by nature greedy, but I realized not so long ago that humans are by nature greedy only when they do not know their true nature. As soon as they come to that realization, that greed disappears. And that gave me hope, because if humans were by nature greedy, we cannot win the race of unsustainability. Let me close then by thanking all my colleagues, all my students who are here with us tonight, all the friends who have joined. We need the input and engagement of all of you in order to move along this new trajectory that we are envisioning. So thanks very much to all of you. And by some
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
by some major stroke, we have managed to finish on time. Wonderful. Thanks to all of you. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night to some and good day to
Good night.
others.
Good morning to others.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.
The only difference from an international quarantine and a general strike is the permission. It's the only difference. We need a system that we can implement internationally and we can shut it down. We'll just everyone sit down. Well, it's time for a global general strike. That's my belief. Thanks for the call today, everyone.
Thank
Much
you,
love.
Kevin.